When you're asked to do something that doesn't sit right with you, you're asked to do something that isn't part of your constitution as a man, how do you deal with those situations?
Charles Tillman spent 13 years in the NFL, then spent 8 years in the FBI forcing open doors on raids. But when the government told him to help round up immigrants, Peanut said no and walked away from it all. And the reaction from NFL players was something else. Let's get into it. Tillman quits the FBI. Charles Tillman resigned from the FBI in early 2025. He had served as a special agent out of the Chicago field office since 2018. His reason for leaving was simple, and he said it himself on the Pivot podcast in September 2025. The administration wanted FBI agents to assist in immigration enforcement operations alongside ICE, and Tillman refused to participate.
So, one of the reasons, well, let me start off by saying this. FBI was great to me. I did awesome. I worked with an amazing group of individuals.
Now hold on. Before anyone gets confused here, Tillman was never an ICE agent. He worked for the FBI. But in January 2025, agents in Chicago were directed to support ICE-led raids under a new crackdown that involved White House border czar Tom Homan and TV personality Dr. Phil McGraw. The operation was called Operation Midway Blitz, and it pulled together ICE, DEA, ATF, Border Patrol, and U.S. Marshals for mass arrests in the city. Reports indicate that over 20% of FBI resources were redirected to immigration duties.
I think some of the things that they're doing now, I personally didn't agree with.
Like what?
Immigration.
Tillman said the public messaging promised the government would go after the most dangerous criminals. But what he saw on the ground looked different. He described quota-driven arrests, sweeps of workers based on appearance, and tactics he viewed as racial profiling. He called it political theater.
Everybody was told you're going to go after like the most dangerous criminals. But what you see on TV and what actually was happening is like people weren't going after that.
And that right there is the line Tillman drew in the sand. He said what was happening on the streets of Chicago did not match what was being promised on television. The targets were not the most dangerous. The targets were regular people. And for a man who spent 8 years kicking down doors to catch violent criminals, gang members, and drug traffickers, that distinction mattered.
And personally, that didn't sit right with me. That didn't sit right with my conscience. Like, you have the ability to refuse an order.
So that is exactly what Tillman did. He refused. On the day of one of the operations, he skipped the raid entirely and went to his daughter's basketball game instead. Then shortly after, he turned in his badge. Now, here is the part that separates Tillman from most of the agents who felt the same way he did. He acknowledged that many of his colleagues hated the new directives just as much as he did, but they could not afford to quit. They had mortgages, they had kids in school, they had pensions they could not walk away from. Tillman was different.
I was in a different position because of my previous career. I made enough money to where I could just walk away and say, you know what, guys? I'm okay. I think I'm good.
That previous career paid him approximately $49 million over 13 NFL seasons. So yeah, walking away from a government salary was not going to put him on the street. But the point he made was not about money. It was about conscience. He said he wanted to explain to his children one day that he made the right call. He wanted to be able to look them in the eye and tell them he stood on the right side of history.
At the end of the day, I want to be on the right side of history when it's all said and done.
And Tillman was careful to point out that he was not trashing the FBI. He praised the agency, he praised his colleagues, he said his 8 years were solid and that they did good work together. But the new policies coming down from Washington crossed a line he was not willing to cross.
Some of the stuff you guys are doing now, I don't necessarily agree with. And that's not in Chicago. That comes from Washington.
He left on good terms. No bad blood, no bitter taste. Just a man who looked at what was being asked of him and said no. The story broke wide open on the Pivot podcast in September 2025. And then The Athletic published a deep profile in January 2026 that filled in every detail of his 8 years carrying a badge. And once those stories hit the internet, the reaction started pouring in. The Pivot hosts who sat across from him during that interview had the first and loudest responses. And what they said about Tillman set the tone for everything that followed. The Pivot reacts.